Hey, welcome to a very special edition of the Dangerous Liberty podcast, where we know that safety at the expense of liberty is slavery. My special guest is a friend of mine that is a former counter-sniper team member for the Secret Service. He's conducted numerous advances during an election year, as well as all over the world. He has agreed to talk to us on the condition of anonymity for obvious professional reasons. Look, the reality is that we had an attack on our country, and I think the American people deserve answers, and they deserve answers beyond just speculation. And, while there's lots of folks out there, because I had lots of people contact me, being a former sniper, they wanted answers. But the reality is that even if you are a former sniper or you're military sniper, law enforcement sniper, or anything else, those jobs are very, very different, from the task organization to the planning process of this, to the roles and responsibilities, to the overall mission set. So, while there's been everything from former snipers that have commented on this, critiqued it, to just long-range shooters, which I don't know what professional experience they're bringing to the table on that. But we want to get it straight from the source, and we're going to provide you some facts of not only what happened, but what should have happened and how we can prevent this in the future, because usually the American people deserve the truth, and that's what we're going to try to get to today. So Mike, I really appreciate you coming on. If you will, just within the scope of what you feel comfortable with, go ahead and introduce yourself, tell the people who you are and what your experience is.
All right. Well, thanks, Gary. I appreciate that. And yes, I spent several years on the counter-sniper team. As a matter of fact, I did numerous advances in many austere environments, to include during election years. So I'm very familiar with exactly what should have been done and where things probably went wrong. I'm not going to say what went wrong, because there's no way to know what went wrong if you are not part of that investigation, or if you're not part of that team. You could never actually, outside, speculating at this point in time, you can never say, hey, this went wrong. But ultimately, I will say this: it is 100% the Secret Service's responsibility. I did hear, Director Cheadle giving an interview in which she said, that the buck stops here. But then she also went on to talk about how local law enforcement had the responsibility. You can delegate a task to provide, security for an area, but the responsibility is by law encoded in U.S. Code Title 18, Section 3056, about the Secret Service's responsibilities, authorities, and the things that they have to do, that they have to account for. It's all found right there in Title 18. And the fact of the matter is, I have not seen from this director a single thing that says, I am a visionary, this agency is going to protect people, which is about, I would say, 80 to 90% of the things you read about their Secret Service's responsibilities and authorities have to do with protection operations and the responsibilities there. And when you read that, hey, you know what? This is what I'm responsible for. But what I really see in all the interviews and the things that she's, given and everything else, what I see is a lot of talk about her diversity hire initiatives.
Yeah, it does seem like, if you look at the interviews and what she's been known for prior to this, and we'll get into this, we'll get into some of the politics, and we'll talk a little bit about how possibly some of the politics ideologies have affected the Secret Service's ability to basically do their job. Yeah. The reality is that we have an American people that have lost faith in so many different government agencies and government institutions, and the Secret Service has been pretty much immune to that, because we had a trust faith that they were the best in the world. And the idea that a 20-year-old untrained kid was able to get, number one, he killed an American out in the crowd. Number two, he actually hit the president, a former president of the United States, and the number one candidate for the Republican Party. It seems so amateur. It's just another thing that, again, erodes the faith in our government institutions. Yeah, and so, going back to Cheadle, everything you saw prior to this was about diversity, was about all these things. I agree. I've seen nothing where her goal, her mission was to make the Secret Service as effective as possible. And, I would even argue that many of the initiatives that she's trying to launch do the exact opposite. That's been her goal, and I think she was successful in that. And I've seen no real responsibility taken at the failures that took place on that day. It is, hey, yeah, I'm responsible, but, and there should be no but.
Absolutely. That the failure that actually took place is a failure actually in the in and of itself. We've talked about this before. You know, you always have what's called a PACE plan, your primary, alternate, contingency, and then emergency, right? Hey, you're going to go down through the options. You're going to find a way to get it done. And that's exactly what you do when you're actually out there conducting advances. I did not see the evidence of this whatsoever. So it's not a matter of all the critiques that you're seeing. People are watching the video footage. I've watched it over and over, hundreds of hours of this video footage. The bottom line is, it's not about what I do see, it's what I'm not seeing. And I'm not seeing people in place. I'm not seeing communications in place. I'm not seeing communications even really happening between entities. All of those things are things that are sorted out in that advance.
And I think it's fair to tell everybody, we've already actually done this interview once. And basically we did this interview, we got through the editing process most of the way, and there was a lot of more information that was coming out in real time. And you know, we're trying to get this out as quickly as possible, but at the same time, we want it to be as relevant, as accurate as possible as well. And you know, basically with all these new reports that were coming out, you gave me a call, you said, hey, you know, because of this, that changes all the things that we talked about. And quite frankly, you told me that your opinion, some of the stated opinions that you had with the new information that come out had kind of changed. So I think a great place to start, Mike, is let's start at the beginning. As if you were going to this location, basically, you know, describe to everybody what the Secret Service does to secure, you know, a location like we saw there in Pennsylvania. You know, tell everybody what your job as a CST member on the planning process and the threat mitigation process of this. And then we'll go through, we'll talk about that. Then we'll kind of hit, you know, what went wrong. What do you think some of those failures were? And then kind of go from there.
Absolutely. So as a member of that advanced team, I would be going out there probably about 5 to 7 days in advance, you know, depending on the venue and things like that. There's a lot of issues there. You're going to have staff members.
Real quick, talk to everybody, just so everybody's on the same page, what an advance is. What does that mean?
So an advance is prior to when you have a protectee going to a specific venue or a location, you're going to have a team of Secret Service personnel that have the experience in each one of their specialized fields. They're going to go out there as part of this team to conduct security surveys and assessments to make the determination on what are we going to do exactly for security, what's needed, what's required. And then, of course, you know, you call back to your respective sections and you're getting all that support sent out to you to be able to cover that venue.
So you're going out there, you're doing a site survey, you're trying to get an idea of how that event's going to take place, you're identifying the threats, you're figuring out ways to mitigate those threats. What representatives of the different teams are going out there? And then, you know, they have their own specialized teams, but then ultimately they're coming up with a cohesive security plan. What is that comprised of, those different teams?
So actually the advanced team could be fairly large in some cases. In this particular case, I would say that they're, you know, the advanced team at a minimum should be, you've got a lead who's going to be in charge of the entire venue area, everything else from if he flies in, if your protectee flies into the local airport, he's in charge of the airport, what happens there, the transportation from the airport to the venue, and then in the venue itself, and then everything until that protectee is wheels up and gone out of his area, right? That entire ball of wax belongs to that lead. Now you've got an airport advance who you've got this guy who's going to do all the security at the airport that he's responsible for and making sure things get set up there. Then you've got a guy at the venue itself. You've got specialized teams such as Special Operations Division, which would be the counter sniper team advance and the counter assault team advance. And a lot of times they piggyback off of each other or they work with each other on a lot of things. Then you also have other sections such as, you know, PID, which is Protective Intelligence Division, that could be out there, TSD, which is going to make sure that, you know, comms, things like that are set up, and, you know, that the podium, they have specific podiums a lot of times that they will use, or if there's ballistic plating or glass and things like that need to be a part of these venues, they're going to bring those to the table, right? They're going to assess and make the determination. A lot of that.
The technical security team is going to be there and say, hey, look, we need these technical security features this is what we need. This is where we need to have them in place. And I guess they're in charge of communications as well.
Yeah, they're also going to work with, WACA and things like that. The communications is actually it's a fairly big piece. Some of those guys might not come out way in advance like that, but you might have some people come out, again, based on the size of what the venue is, what it entails and everything else. You've got all these different pieces that could be sent. So, at a minimum, you've got each one of these, various disciplines coming out there. Protective Intelligence Division, there was every single location I ever went to, usually the day before the event, you would have a briefing that would be provided by all the advanced team members. The briefing would let all local law enforcement and even like some Secret Service officials, that would be overseeing some of the protective operations that are actually traveling with the protectee. They might have a representative out there or something to, get the whole ball of wax, briefing and everything else. Or there could be others that could come out to the briefing as well. That they're going to be in this specialized briefing that says exactly where we're going to have personnel, what they're going to be doing, who's responsible for what, and then how are we going to mitigate a lot of the threats. And each one of those elements or members of that advanced team is going to be a part of that brief to specifically talk about their piece.
And of course, those advanced team members, they're on the ground looking to see what local law enforcement resources are available, and they're making coordination with them as well, right?
That's happening during that week that they're there ahead of that trip. Exactly. Yep. They're going to make contact with local law enforcement, especially with the, counter sniper team. One of the big things is you've got to make sure that all the guys that are coming in, that their weapons are in fact zeroed and everything else for that particular venue. Things change between temperatures and elevations and things like that, of course. So you got to make sure that everybody's equipment and everything else that you need them to have, that it's present, it's there, everything's
now, are you talking about
should.
They're making sure that the local law enforcement weapons are zeroed and operational and all those things, or are you just talking about their own equipment?
I'm talking about their own equipment,
yeah,
right?
Okay.
Additional teams. So if I were doing the advance there and I said, hey, I need 2 teams, then you're sending me 1 additional guy to work with me, and then you're sending actually 2 other additionals to be that other team. And when they get there, we're going to go out and we're going to make sure we zero our rifles and test our equipment, make sure everything's in working order, just like everybody else that's there. They're going to be doing the same thing.
So that's what an advance is, especially a planning process, making sure that we have representatives for everybody that's involved that are making sure that their specific piece. Because one of the things I thought that was very interesting that you talked about, we were talking about the fact that, there's lots of different snipers on a spectrum, right, from military to law enforcement, and what the counter sniper teams do is very different. Your ROE is different, task organization, equipment, capabilities. All those things are very different from the standard LE sniper or military sniper. And even if you've been trained in counter sniper operations before as a military sniper, which I have, what you guys do is very, very different than what I've seen before. One of the things I thought was really interesting about that is that you said the other teams within that protective package, a lot of times they don't even know what you guys as counter sniper team members, your roles, responsibilities, and capabilities are as well. I thought that was pretty interesting.
It is actually, it's very true. There are a lot of parts and members of the Secret Service that don't really understand all the things that the counter sniper team does, what we do for the advance, and what we bring to the table. So the fact is there's even directors, assistant directors in the past that they've asked, well, who did this, security assessment? Who came up with all this information? To which, I would reply, well, sir, that's what I've been doing here this entire time. And they were actually kind of surprised by that, which really kind of blew my mind. And it's really kind of sad that you've got directors in the past and deputy directors in the past. They're in charge of all this. And the Secret Service world, mind you, it's not big. This is a small world, okay? And if you don't know what all your elements actually do for the most important thing that you actually provide as an agency, there's a real breakdown, there's a real problem. And I honestly haven't seen, a real director with a vision and an understanding of what all these elements do since Ralph Basham, actually. He was a visionary. He actually brought a lot of things to the table. He had a direction he wanted the entire agency to move in to become more capable as an agency in providing protective operations. And quite frankly, I haven't seen anything from a director since that time. I've seen a lot of empty suits, and I've seen a lot of, various agendas, but none of those agendas really support anything that they're actually responsible for that you find in Title 18.
The actual mission set.
The actual mission for the Secret Service.
All right, so that's the advance, and that's what an advance does. So take us through, that advance arrives at that location. What are they doing?
So in particular, I want to really bring out the counter sniper team advance. And the reason why I want to bring that out is because this plays a huge part in what we just saw this last Saturday. As a counter sniper team advance, what I would be doing is identifying all areas of potential threat, and then I would assign mitigating control measures to ensure that that was not going to be an open area, right? Sure. Mitigating control measures. There's so many things that you could do in this particular case. There could have been coordination to make sure that you had civilian law enforcement preventing access to the roof of that building. During that advance, I'm going to actually do what's called, I'm going to walk the walk, right? I'm going to walk in the proposed steps of the protectee. And I'm going to know what they are because the staff members who are planning this entire visit that work actually for the protectee, whether it's the president, a candidate, or otherwise, they know what they want him to do when they arrive, right? So they're going to walk me through the whole process from everything when he gets off of the airplane at the airport. And honestly, even at the airport, I would get on the steps to the truck, the ladder truck that comes out and pulls up to Air Force One or any other aircraft or whatever that's going to bring this protectee to the location. I'm going to bring myself to that same elevation. I'm going to look around and I'm going to assess every single thing that I can see that sees that protectee. And I'm going to know what's out there 100%. And it doesn't matter how many hours this takes. It doesn't matter if I spend all day, all night. It doesn't matter if I get 3 hours sleep tonight. What matters to me is I've got peace of mind that when that protectee arrives at that location, he's going to leave there with the same amount of holes he arrived with. That's the bottom line, right? So from the airport to the venue itself, everywhere at that venue, same thing. Hey, the stage is going to be built days in advance. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to get on that stage. I'm going to look around. I'm going to take photographs. I'm going to do everything to ensure that I know everything that can potentially see that protectee. We even go so far as to take the height of the protectee into consideration. So Trump being 6'3", if you're somebody who's not 6'3", well, then maybe you need to bring a little step stool with you, or maybe you got to bring something or stand on something to where you're about 6'3", and then you're going to go ahead and look around and see, does that change anything? Is there a field of view that just changed from what I can see to what can actually see him, every part of him, right? Now I'm going to assign mitigation methods to each and every one of those areas that can potentially see that protectee. Whether it's going to be, I'm going to order up additional counter sniper teams to cover sectors, which is absolutely what I'm going to do. Or in some cases, no matter what, you can't possibly have enough assets, right? So what you do is you try to knock out as many as you can by blocking those fields of view. You can do that by the positioning of the stage. We saw that actually in Butler, right? Because the stage was in front of those three buildings, which means nothing behind those three buildings is actually really in play because they have zero line of sight on your protectee. So now I've greatly narrowed down what can actually see in to that protectee. Now, as I'm assigning mitigation, I'm going to look at what are the most critical areas first. Let's look at that. And we look at Butler, Pennsylvania. In particular, we're looking at the rooftop actually that this individual, this murderer, got access to and went up on top of. There's so many things that were a failure here, but again, in that advance, he should have never been able to get on the roof to begin with. There should have been personnel that were posted out there. Preferably, if I have the personnel, I would say I want a Secret Service agent with like 2 local officers and you usually pair them up like that, right? A small team of some kind. And we call that a counter sniper response team. And you would position them in areas where there's already a potential for a threat because you can't see what's happening there.
Dead space.
There's that dead space, a defilade, you got tree lines and everything else, but of course those can be mitigated in other ways, such as, having a helicopter with a forward-looking infrared on it or things like that, which I used actually in several cases. One of the cases that I used was actually the vice president went to years ago, went to an event down in Richmond. They were planting trees in this preserve area, and the vice president was there. And, it was only just 2 teams that I had down there. And a lot of people were like, well, why would you only have 2 teams down there in a huge, reserve or area like that? And it's because those 2 teams could actually cover the entire sectors that were needed. The biggest thing that I had out there is that I had 2 helicopters, both with FLIR. So now that forward-looking infrared, they can detect a lot of those, a personnel out there. They could detect if there was a person out there, if they were laying in the tree line or whatever with a ghillie suit on. It's not going to protect you from that forward-looking infrared. We're going to be able to see that, right? Now, I also there'd be an agent in those helicopters that I could directly communicate with. Now, here's the problem. This is what I didn't see in Butler. And I'm not going to say that this is the beat all end all. This is the straw that broke the camel's back here. But I will say this. What I did not see was a local law enforcement officer actually posted with our counter sniper teams there. Now, I believe this is opinion. This is completely opinion. I believe that probably would have been something that would have prevented this from even becoming an issue. And the reason why I say that is we know now from all these reports coming in, how long in advance did local law enforcement not only just know that there was a person on that rooftop, but that person likely had a rifle. We know that there was time. If they were saying it on their radios, which they were, then immediately that local police officer who had communications with that outer perimeter area that I'm still responsible for, I would have heard that.
Yeah, and that was one of the major things that had come out after we did the first interview was we made a lot of statements assuming that there was very little time to react to a possible threat on the ground. And just yesterday we had all kinds of reports come out with video evidence that made it very clear that Crooks had been seen, had been identified as a suspicious person. His picture had been taken, and his picture had been circulated to most of the law enforcement in the area, and I'm assuming that picture also went up to the Secret Service as well.
An hour before the shooting, the suspect is filmed loitering in this area. A local law enforcement official told The Times that around 20 minutes before Trump began speaking, a police officer took a photo of the man who was acting suspicious. The officer circulates the photo among other officers, but loses track of the suspicious man.
So yeah, that's also speculation. We don't know if the Secret Service actually got that photograph. I would assume that they would, but that would have been the responsibility of that Protective Intelligence Division representative. As a matter of fact, the brief that happens beforehand, the day beforehand, before anybody's taking post and before the venue is even secure, in that brief, circulating to all local law enforcement, circulating to all Secret Service that are assigned to that location, right? In that brief, you got Protective Intelligence that's going to be passing around photographs, talking about every person who is a person of concern.
We have this picture of a reported suspicious individual on the ground there. In a perfect world, what could have and what should have happened in regard to the Secret Service response to that?
What the Secret Service absolutely should have done with that is it should have been circulated. There should have been active teams out there looking for this individual. If he was spotted anywhere near that venue, then honestly, as much as it would have probably angered as many people as it would have, the venue should have been held up. It should have been delayed. His exposure to the public at that point should have absolutely been delayed until somebody had eyes on and knew exactly what was going on.
And that situation is kind of a perfect example of what the counter sniper response teams could have and should have done. They should have directed. We have these buildings that obviously the counter sniper teams wouldn't have visual access to the other side of that. They could have had a counter sniper response teams down there working with local law enforcement, and that would have been a perfect example of where the local law enforcement should have been directed to make contact with this person. Am I correct? Incorrect?
So that's not really what you want to use that counter sniper response team for.
Okay.
But because I want them to be able to be mobile, I don't want them to have to be fixed on anything in particular. I want them available in case I have a potential threat that I need to mitigate right then and there that develops.
Gotcha.
What I'm looking for in that particular case is counter surveillance unit, right? CSU. And there should have been some personnel that were out there in plain clothes, walking around, being able to look for this particular individual. They would actually be looking for all the individuals that were identified as potential threats that could show up at that venue. And this is definitely a person of interest. We especially know that now because not only did he get identified hours before this even took place, a photograph was taken by a police officer and circulated, but you also had even the parents calling local law enforcement saying, hey, we're really concerned here. So, is this a person of interest? 100%. Why do we not have eyes on him? Why are we not looking for him in particular?
Trump being who he is and the administration having the relationship with Trump that they had, and even a lot of the federal law enforcement agencies having being combative with Trump. I don't know if that's the right word I want to use, but not a good relationship. One of the things that I personally immediately thought about, as well as I've seen asked around, is there any chance that resources were withheld from Trump? Because we know that there was a big push to remove his security detail to begin with. Because of the political climate, was there any chance that Trump didn't get the full complement of security that he should have? And I know this is 100% speculation on your part. Did you see the normal amount of assets that you would expect to see on that ground?
No. That's just unequivocally no. I have provided protection and done advances for a lot of candidates in the past. I can't even begin to count how many stops President Obama had when he was candidate Obama. And I think the thing to really, consider here too is the fact that.
So just to be clear, your answer is no. You did not see the normal amount of resources or the amount of resources that you would expect to see given that situation.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely
That's
not.
interesting.
And I'll get into some of the specifics of that. As a matter of fact, I think it's important actually to start from the top and trickle down and show how that affected the actual venue itself, right? So starting at the very top, let's look at the Constitution, right? What does it say about having to provide protection to a protectee or a candidate at this point? It specifically talks about in Title 18 when it talks about the duties, responsibilities, authorities of the Secret Service. It specifically mentions 120 days, 120 days out. Now, you can still provide protection to candidates before that. As a matter of fact, we actually had a compliments, to provide protection for President Obama. I think he was the earliest to that date. We had provided protection for him earlier than any other previous candidate. Because of the potential threats and because he was at that point, very clearly the forerunning candidate for his party. Right. So as a result of that, we picked him up significantly earlier than what we normally would have. A lot of times you wait until after the primary, maybe even after the, of course, the DNC or the RNC take place, and now you're picking up candidates. Trump is clearly the candidate for the Republican Party. So he's provided security. Now here's the thing. I think that pretty much the details that he's got at this point is because he's former president. But, written in stone, 120 days out, he's got to be considered candidate Trump.
He was clearly candidate.
He was clearly candidate Trump at this point, right? Now, this means you now have actually a congressional committee. You've got the Speaker of the House, you've got the Minority Leader, you've got the Senate Majority, Senate Minority, and then they're going to select one other person to be a part of that committee. That committee is going to assess everything. They're going to make a determination, a recommendation to the the Director of Homeland Security and say, hey, this is what we think this candidate should have. This is the type of protection they should have. The Director of Homeland Security is then going to convey that and ensure that that happens with the Director of the Secret Service, right? Now, I want you to understand, I am in no way taking or alleviating any responsibility from Director Cheadle. That is not the case. Okay?
She is.
She's absolutely responsible for this.
She's alleviating a lot of responsibility.
She's doing that herself. Yeah. But ultimately, I mean, two of the documents the public should absolutely be screaming for is, I want to know what was the recommendation the Department of Homeland Security that director received. I want to see the communication between the Director of Homeland Security and the Director of the Secret Service. Tell me that's classified. I highly doubt that, right? That could be very easily declassified and say they should get this level of protection. Answer that. There should be an answer as to what actually was recommended here, what was actually assigned.
All right, so if you like content like this, make sure you like, subscribe, throw a comment down below. Share this interview. I think it's really important. Number one is that helps us out, but on top of that, I think we're covering some information that just hasn't been shared anywhere else. I think the public needs to know. But just like we talked about in this interview, if you're going to come to the correct conclusions, you need as much good information as you have. And I think a lot of this information is just not known to the public. Also, if you'd like to support and contribute to what we do on this channel, our Patreon link is down in the description below. We really do appreciate the support there. And if you're not already following us, here are our other social media sites. Make sure you go follow us on there. We do a lot of cool things on there as well. And every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, we have our Dangerous Liberty podcast. It's a live podcast. We talk about guns, gear, training, politics. We have special guests on all the time. We'd love for you to join us live so you can ask questions that we answer. We read your comments. It's a good time. Come join us. You'll have a great time as well. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this interview. Let me break in just for a minute because I'm curious. We've known each other for a long time. We've had lots of different conversations. I've kind of probed your brain a little bit about your experience with Secret Service. You've always been very passionate, very proud of your time at the Secret Service. How embarrassing is this to you? And just, from a personal standpoint, what are your thoughts on the failures that took place on that day?
I'm deeply hurt. I'm not even gonna lie about that. I am deeply disturbed and I am hurt that this happened because this is not the Secret Service that I know. It just isn't. This would not have been overlooked in any way, shape, or form. I have lost sleep over this. It has angered me. It is something that is constantly on my mind. And it's not something that's going to be easy to face and say, we were 100% wrong, we're responsible, we failed. 100%, this is a catastrophic failure.
This is so embarrassing as an American. As an American that, we are seen as the world's superpower, the world's leader when it comes to tactics, capabilities, and the fact that, some 20-year-old LARPing as a sniper can get access to a former president the way that he did. It's just embarrassing. I can only imagine how you feel being so closely tied with the organization, but the Secret Service is the world standard when it comes to protection. And man, so much credibility has been lost with this, I know in my mind. So I can only imagine how you feel.
This isn't a dent in the armor we're talking about. This isn't like, hey, we received a little ding here. No, this is a kick in the teeth.
Yeah.
Right? This is that level of failure. But I also believe, understand this too, I also believe it's still the agency that is the best equipped, trained, and prepared to do executive protection at this level.
I don't necessarily see this as, this is, while there were definitely failures of boots on the ground, like we can't get away from that, but this is not a negative reflection on the men and women that are out there every single day. I think this is a major leadership problem. And it's what we've seen time and time again in all the other institutions that we have come to distrust in their capabilities, whether it's Homeland Security, whether it's, Border Patrol. The guys and gals on the ground aren't necessarily the problem to some extent, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But for the most part, what we see is a major lapse in leadership whose primary focus is to make the organization of which they are the head of the most capable in the world. That should be the only standard every single time. And we've seen such a degradation from our military to every agency under the DOJ to the CIA. There's a mix between diminished capabilities and nothing short of just political activists being, infiltrating and controlling these entities to where we have lost all trust. And it's really sad to see the Secret Service fail on the scale that they did on July 13th.
It does. It really breaks my heart. I know you can see that. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
It is something that has absolutely ate away at my very soul. It's put a pit in my stomach. And speaking of that pit, I'm going to tell you this. It brings back the thoughts, the memories of every time that you're assigned to go out and do an advance. You go to bed at night, your brain doesn't shut off.
Yeah.
You are constantly going over all the things that you surveyed. Did I do everything that was possibly could be done to mitigate every potential threat that was out there? Did I miss anything whatsoever? And sometimes things will pop into your head. And there have been times at 1 o'clock in the morning, I get out of my bed in my hotel room, I go down to my rental car, I drive out to that location. It doesn't matter. I don't care if it's 2 hours away in some cases. I'm going to drive to that location. I'm going to get that out of my head. I'm going to make sure that I am protecting that protectee the best of my ability. Whatever it is there that I need to mitigate, I'm going to mitigate that. And I'm going to make sure I record that accordingly. And then I'm going to go back and then I'm going to get some sleep when I can. And that is absolutely the priority. And you know what? That pit in your stomach, it really comes when the protectee is on the ground. Yeah. They land, they're on the ground, and you just feel it from the time that they arrived.
Constantly
to the time
questioning
that they leave
yourself,
your
have
location.
I covered everything?
Yes.
Because now, my objective is here on the ground, and I can only imagine, like, all right, was there anything I missed? Because now it's game time. Mm-hmm. No, that's again, I can only imagine how you feel. I know we as Americans are very disappointed. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I'm more and more disappointed in our federal government and the institutions that we have grown up trusting, admiring. It does seem that we've had a major erosion of our capabilities for probably multiple different reasons. So, you said that the advance, that really the source of this problem, the failure started at the advance. Do you think that there's any chance that all of these different resources were asked for during the advance and that those resources were denied? Those vulnerabilities were identified, but they weren't given the tools that they needed to mitigate that. And I know this is speculation, but I'm just curious, in your mind, we talked about counter surveillance teams being on the ground. We don't know. I don't know. Maybe you do. I don't know if there was or was not counter surveillance teams, but it sure doesn't seem like it. Would there ever be a chance where you'd had to advance and get on the ground like, okay, no, we don't need counter surveillance teams given the situation, or whatever other resources you think that should have been there that weren't? What are the possibilities? What are the different possibilities that led to those resources not being there?
So I know that from some of those other advanced members, you always ask for the world, right? Always. Sure. Make somebody else tell you, no, we don't have that, or no, I'm not going to send it to you, right? Because then they have to actually answer for, why didn't I give this person what they were asking for? But I'm absolutely going to ask for everything humanly possible to be able to provide protection here, right? That's my concern as being on that advance. My concern is not the resources. Do you have enough resources? My concern is I'm going to tell you what I need. Then you're going to tell me what I'm going to get.
Now, speaking of that, so when that advanced team requests those resources, how do those resources go up? Are those actual documents? I'm sure they're digital documents at this point. But, because I would like to see, and hopefully Congress gets to see what was asked for and what was actually provided, because I want to know the discrepancy between those two. Like, look, Agent John down here asked for all of these different resources. They asked for the counter surveillance teams. They asked for additional resources, but they were denied. hopefully those documents are being preserved. I know that there is now a congressional investigation going on. They have sent out subpoenas. They have asked for the preservation of documents. But what does that documentation look like? Does that type of documentation exist? And is denial of resources actually written or preserved in a document normally to begin with?
It's not. So the communication could be something so simple as I pick up the phone, I call back, I say, hey, this is what I need. Typically, you're going to send a message or an email, and it's going to detail those things to make sure that they
So
get
there
that
is
information.
email sent.
There should be some sort of trail, like an email, at the very least, an email that's going to outline, hey, this is what I'm going to need you to send me. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest. The fact of the matter is, as doing a counter sniper advance, I have always gotten the team members that I've requested. And there have been times that I've requested like a lot of team members, you're talking like 20
You asked
plus.
for the world and you got it.
And I got it.
Yeah.
Yep. And again, it was based on the venue, and who was going to be there, the threat levels, things like that. And I got everything that I asked for, right? And I actually got that every single time I did in advance. But you look at a lot of the other sections, right? A lot of the other advances that took place, and the lead might request some things as well. And sometimes, they're gonna be told, hey, look, we don't have that many. And the real shortage that we're talking about, you're really talking about agent post standers, right? If I need an agent to stand over there, what's the difference between that person and a local law enforcement? Well, there's a lot different. Number one, the focus and training of that agent is going to be protective operations. They got it even in the basic agent course training. They understand.
They don't spend
what's
their
at
half
stake.
their time doing traffic control or
Right. They don't do things outside that box, right? They do investigations, but they on the regular, they're going to be doing protective operations, supporting protective operations, usually as a post stander somewhere. A lot of times they're not going to have a level of, higher level of responsibility or something like that in one of these visits because that's not their regular job. Doesn't mean that they don't know how to do it. So they get out there. I got that post stander. Not only do I know that they've been trained, but I also know that I've got direct communication with them and they understand how we operate as an agency, right?
just to kind of put a button on, the advance and how that works a little bit. So we have all these different elements that are going to participate in the advance in their specialized roles, and I'm assuming all those reports, requests, and everything else get briefed and funneled back up to the lead. Is that correct?
That is correct. The lead would get regular briefs from every element because he's ultimately responsible for the entire
And
ball
from
of
all
wax.
these different pieces, he's making a final determination of what is needed, as well as just taking a look at and saying, oh, you know what, we might need additional assets. He's seeing the big picture. He or she is seeing in the big picture.
That's exactly right. But no lead is ever going to tell any one of those specialized locations as far as Special Operations Division advances, or if you got K9, K9 advance. They're not going to say, oh well, you don't need that. That's because that's not their areas of expertise. I can't tell you how many times I've had a lead who actually really didn't understand all the things that counter snipers do, or even that counter assault team does, or other elements, like TSD or K9.
So if CST or the CAT teams or whatever else said, hey, you know what, I need this many positions covered, the lead isn't going to be the one that says, no, you don't. So if there was a denial of resources, it didn't happen from those guys and gals on the ground. It happened at a higher level.
It happened in a different place probably. So now that being said, I actually kind of want to let's see if we can tie that into some things here at Butler that we saw, or rather what we didn't see and what we know. So a lot of the people that were at that venue in Butler where he was speaking were not actually Secret Service, but they were augmentees from other federal agencies and local law enforcement. Now, I couldn't tell you exactly what agency or, things like that. Of course, we might find some of that stuff out in the investigation. It depends. They seem to be holding a lot of information, not sharing it with the public. But I will say
Well,
watching that video footage.
If you're very transparent, it's hard to cover things up. But before we even get that, just to even kind of set the tone, in your assessment, you know, Trump is not a normal candidate. And you know, coming from a security background, if I'm looking at Trump and I know that he's my protectee, like, he is as divisive as he gets. He's as hated as he is loved. You know, we've had such high rhetoric towards Trump, negative rhetoric from Hitler to, you know, the end of democracy to dictator. Like, I've never seen the level of hate and rhetoric, you know, just hateful rhetoric going toward a candidate like we've seen with Trump from like, you know, actual politicians, senators, even from the administration itself. The administration, Biden has said that Trump is the greatest threat to America multiple times. With that, if you were on the ground, would you automatically go into it with the mindset like Trump is, the threat against Trump is much higher than a normal candidate, I guess would that be part of your assessment?
In my opinion, in my assessment, I would say yes, the threat against Trump is probably pretty high. I would love to see the threat assessment that was done for him and what the recommendations actually were. I would love to see that. I think probably everybody would love to see that, actually, because when I compare what we did for President Obama when he was a candidate compared to what you've now got, and I say candidate Trump because we are well within that, under that 120 mark. He's clearly the defined candidate. This should actually take precedent over him being a former president, to be quite honest with you, because the level of protection he would get as a candidate is far greater. So, and that's because you're actually protecting the free election system. So let's get something, you know, right off the bat. It's not about the people. And I know the media likes to make it about the people, but it's not. It's the fact that you are protecting the free election system, freedom of choice in this country. If you eliminate choices, it's not really freedom at that point, right? So that being said, you know, I'm just going to say he absolutely should have more than what he had. And the shift that he should have had a much greater shift. And I know that there's a lot of...
And by shift, you mean he should have had a much larger complement of resources and protective personnel there on the ground provided directly by the Secret Service.
Absolutely. The shift in particular that's that inner circle we talked about, and I know a lot of your viewers probably have even seen where they talk about the 3 layers of security that the Secret Service has. You have the inner circle. This is really the shift's responsibility, and it's the guys in suits and sunglasses that stand all around him and everything everywhere he goes, right? That's the shift. So the guys that you saw, as a matter of fact, in the video, who all jumped on, that's the shift. I say guys generically, you know, there were 3 females that we saw there, of course. So, and I know there's a lot of criticism as far as, you know, the females that were there. I don't know whether they are really good agents or not. I mean, I don't know them, you know.
Well, I think this conversation is something we talked about in the original interview. We went down the DEI rabbit hole, and I think we should definitely talk about that again. Is there, you know, if you look at this picture right here, I mean, it almost looks like she's using her own protectee and her fellow Secret Service agents as cover. She looks scared. Is there any TTP that would justify what's going on right here?
Corey Comparatori, this 50-year-old man, this loving father and husband, covered his family with his own body, his own life to protect them. And that was his instinct to do that. Yeah. If that's not your instinct, you don't belong. That's the bottom line, you know? And I got to be honest with you, I feel ashamed when I see things like that.
Well, like I said, is there anything that justifies what's happening in this picture? Like, I have a heart, like, I don't know, maybe there's some sort of tactic and technique that, you know, once we body bunker on the president, we need to have one person standing back. I don't know. Is there anything that justifies what is happening right here?
There is nothing that I can think of that justifies that in particular. You see
That looks
everybody
like
else.
what that looks like is a instinct of self-preservation. That looks like an instinct of fear. And I always want to give, I wasn't there, I don't know what happened. I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but there's nothing that I could come up with, and I just wanted to hear your insight to explain what is happening right here, because this is embarrassing to me if it is what it looks like on the surface.
And you're absolutely right. If this is what it looks like on the surface, it's incredibly embarrassing, right? For this agent, as well as for the entire Secret Service, and for all those that did the right thing. All those Secret Service agents, males and females, that ran to their protectee and covered him the best that they could. I give every last one of those, I give them an A here, just simply because, hey, within seconds. Now understand, people can criticize, hey, they should have been there faster, they should have been closer to him, things like that. But the bottom line is, within seconds of when a shot was taken, they were running at him, and they had pigpiled him within seconds, covering them with their own bodies.
What happened?
The best that they could, even lifting their arms, trying to cover every part of him that was humanly possible, willing to sacrifice themselves for, honestly, for America, for freedom, and those. I see some TikTokers. I'm sorry, Gary. I'm like fired up about this. Sure. I see some TikTokers. I see some people out there. They put these things on there. Hey, why did you miss hitting Trump? What is wrong with you? Like, that's such a narrow view. I mean, he represents a free election system, and if we can't do that as a country, if we can't protect that, it goes well beyond our borders.
Well, and I think some of the vitriol that's even come from sitting congressmen and women toward the president, whether they say it out loud or not, we've definitely have had, congressional aides, tweet things like that as well. It's not just, some random teenage TikToker. We've seen this level of vitriol, and I do believe that behind the scenes we have some elected politicians expressing those same views. But one of the things that constantly has come up, and I think is a super legitimate question, is we have females on President Trump's detail that are like 2 feet shorter than President Trump. Is the height, you talked a little bit about the advance. Hey, I'm gonna get on a stool, I'm gonna look at it I wanna be able to see from the protectee's perspective. One of the things that would just be a natural calculation in my mind is like, hey, I want to have protectees that have the ability to actually put their body between the president and a possible threat. And if you are assigning protectees that are 2 feet shorter than the president himself, what is that about? Is that normal? Is the height of the president from the inner circle, is that normally part of the calculation of who is assigned to him? Because that seems very odd to me.
It should be, but it's not.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of reasons that could fall into play. It is very unfortunate, but let's be perfectly honest. The leadership of the Secret Service is going to be in some way politically tied, right? We know this.
So, in a perfect, because I'm assuming, given the type of employees the Secret Service would attract, and that job would attract. I mean, it's fair to say that there's some options when it comes to taller agents within the service, right? We could have had, regardless of the reason we didn't, we could have had agents that were capable, that were at least as tall as the president, so that we can provide him as much coverage as we possibly can.
I would like to say yes, that there's some females probably in the
I'm not
agency.
talking about females. I'm just saying,
or just period.
That shouldn't even be, whether they're a female or not, that should not be part of the calculation, in my opinion. And I think that's part of the problem, and we'll get into some of the DEI stuff on that. But, to me, that's just an obvious, glaring example of what went wrong, and maybe something that needs to be addressed at the congressional level. That, like, hey, you know what? If you're 5 foot tall, you shouldn't be assigned to a protectee that's 6'4". I mean, that just seems obvious to me.
It seems pretty obvious. I will be fair though. There are times when you want to look at, hey, do we have males and females? And sometimes your pool of, and I hate saying this, but I mean, let's be honest. I mean, look at the average height of males and the average height of females. So it's not, I'm not saying that women can't do the job, but what I'm saying is typically females are going to be smaller. There are some that are larger. I would love to see more of them actually in the Secret Service. But what this
even
does,
some of the females that were on the protected detail, they were both short and large.
so that's an equation, yes. Uh, so you do want some females because they can go places where the males can't,
Okay.
right? And that's, you really do want that capability because you're not only talking, a lot of times you're talking about a protectee, usually a lot of times they might be traveling with a spouse, a child or something like that. You want, which they have their own details for them.
Yeah.
And if you have your protectee is a male and their spouse is a female, then you definitely want protectees for that female that can go where they go, things like that, right? As well as cover them. So, but to be honest with you, the pool of people that you can select from are not that great, really. If you're talking about, I need specifically some females for this detail.
Again, I don't know. I don't know what the normal thing is. I hate the idea that we're picking females for the sake of picking females, or any demographic. I just don't even think that should be part of the calculation. In your opinion, Trump would automatically have an elevated threat level?
Absolutely, he would have had an elevated threat level. I don't see how the threat assessment could have possibly come back that there is little to no threat whatsoever. That would be the most ridiculous thing I could even imagine.
Anyway, in my mind, having done a lot of security work, just again, given Trump being who he is, whatever I would have as far as the threat assessment, there'd be like an extra percentage that I'd need to throw on there, just for the tone of the country towards Trump, and even world leaders. There's lots of world leaders now. There's some, I don't know how credible it is, but now there's talk about an Iranian threat. That they were talking about possibly coming up with a plan to assassinate Trump. I don't know how credible that is. It doesn't really matter. But the fact is, we have a candidate that attracts a lot of negative attention, both at the domestic and the international level. There's lots of world leaders that would rather have Biden stay in office than Trump get reelected. I think that's just obvious on its face. All right, so number one, Trump has an elevated threat level. And number two, you didn't see the normal contingent of resources that you think that Trump should have had.
I didn't see that. I didn't see evidence of counter-sniper response teams being out there. I didn't see evidence of even counter-assault team. How many counter-assault team personnel did I actually count that were Secret Service? Like maybe 2. That's not even a full complement. That's not even. So when
Obama, just to give this some perspective, when Obama was a candidate, how many CAT team members do you think, just off the top of your head, that he had?
I would say probably no less than 6, easily. They would be in his motorcade. They would have been there to do the advanced course, and that's not counter assault team, a couple of Secret Service augmented by local SWAT guys, like we probably saw in the video footage there, when you see 3 personnel in tactical gear come up. 2 are in black and 1 is wearing green. The one wearing green is not Secret Service. Okay, I don't know where he comes from or anything like that, but he's not Secret Service. The other 2 that are dressed in black, that's Hawkeye. That's counter assault team. Hawkeye is the call sign for the counter assault team, and they came up to the stage. They did what they were supposed to do. They made sure there's no additional threats, especially something coming in close. And they were that barrier there, right, to protect and to get ready for movement.
There was a lot of criticism on response. Obviously, the CAT teams aren't normally in the inner circle. They're off, somewhere in the flanks.
So their primary goal at this point is to get ready for their motorcade security, right? So,
But the point is that if, right here in this video, we can see the first time that we see, at least from this perspective, a counter-assault team member come into view was less than 16 seconds after the first shot. So, I mean, given that, we're going from, hey, we might be out here at the flanks looking at the crowd, making sure the motorcade's ready for movement if it is, whatever all their roles and responsibilities are, to flip the switch and get on station in less than 16 seconds is a pretty quick response given all the other roles and responsibilities that they have in place. So the immediate response from the inner to the middle was pretty remarkable in a positive way, except for that one agent using the body bunker as cover.
I just want to back up just a little bit here. Their response was good. Going through the whole video as we watched it together, the fact of the matter is I don't really have, I know there's a lot of people saying, oh, they should have done this, they should have done this, they should have moved him off the X faster, the biggest issue with that really is that banner that goes across the front of that stage, most likely, I couldn't tell you, I wasn't there, but most likely that's going to have armor plating behind it, some sort of ballistic shielding, so that when they have to take him down to the ground to protect him and cover him with their bodies, you've also got that ballistic shielding providing a level of protection. So there is that consideration.
And we also don't know what's going on the radio traffic.
We don't know what's going on the radio traffic, right? We could hear some things over the microphone there, but I guarantee you couldn't hear everything because a lot of those agents have earpieces in. You're not catching all the conversations that could be taking place.
And one of the things we talked about in the last interview is we didn't know what the extent, at that time, they didn't know what the extent of President Trump's injuries were.
No.
It's easy to look back and say, oh, well, he just got hit in the ear, but like the dude's bleeding from his head. He could have had a freaking through shot, or, he could have been in a critical condition state. And number one, they're trying to protect him, trying to assess that all at the same time. And I think, given that information, the response was pretty good.
I think it was right.
It's easy to armchair quarterback that from, post-analysis. I think overall the response was pretty positive. So typically that banner there that we see here in this photo, that is typically going to have some sort of ballistic protection behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. And that's for that purpose. That's that emergency.
There's so many things like that the average American people don't know, don't understand. So they're automatically, without the right information, they're coming to the wrong conclusions every time, including a lot of professional people out there, whether they're law enforcement, military, or whatever else. Mm-hmm. There's just some of these nuanced things that the Secret Service does that you don't understand, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about the counter sniper teams. You gave me a lot of information. I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. Going into the event, what went right, what went wrong, what can we do to make sure that this never happens again?
So starting right from the beginning, when the shots were first fired, what went right is before those shots were even fired, of course, we see some footage. We see the counter sniper teams are already on some glass. They're already looking. They may have been alerted. It appears to me as though they've been alerted already. There's a potential threat. There's something happening on that rooftop. Whatever the case might be.
At 6:05 p.m., Trump begins his speech. Right now, the sharpshooters behind him appear relaxed and are standing upright. At 6:09 p.m., exactly 2 minutes before Trump is hit, rallygoers start pointing at a man crawling atop this building, next to the staging area. It's the building closest to the rally area.
Right there, see him? He's laying down, see him?
Yeah, he's laying down.
Criminals. We have criminals.
He's
We
on
have
the roof. He's
drug
right
dealers. We have people that
right
should
here,
not be
right
here.
on the roof.
As the crowd yells warnings, the Times identified at least one local police officer walking alongside the building. At the same moment this scene plays out, footage captures one of the sniper teams behind Trump turn around and face toward the building. The other sniper team can also be seen looking intently in the same direction.
These guys are now trained in on that site, right? They're looking for a potential threat right there. So I think that was really good. they're focused on that. They're going to mitigate that threat and neutralize it if necessary. Yeah. Now, then we have some shots that take place within a few seconds of that first shot. Of course, our shooter in this case. He fires 5 shots, but he does it in such quick succession. You're only talking a few seconds here.
Yeah. Those were clearly not well-aimed shots.
They were not well-aimed shots. I mean, you look at the trajectories of after that first shot. The first shot was probably his.
First 2 were slow. Those were definitely I can
more
attribute
deliberate. Yeah,
being more deliberate, and we could likely attribute much greater level of precision taking place in those first 2 shots.
At some point, according to a local official, a police officer is hoisted up to check the roof, but drops when the gunman aims at him. One of the snipers drops his binoculars. The other grabs his gun. Within seconds, 3 shots ring out.
Take a look at what happened.
Followed by a volley of several more.
So you got 5 shots fired in very quick succession. He clearly had more ammunition to fire so many more, but within a few seconds of when he could be discovered, a team eliminated him. And the report is, or there's some speculation as to, which team may have done that, because they're saying, the team that was actually to the extreme left of the stage as you're looking at it, actually was closer to the shooter, but didn't have a direct, couldn't potentially see him. And there's a lot of things.
It does seem like between the new reports coming out and just looking at the line of sights that were capable just from an overhead perspective, it looks like the team that we haven't seen a lot of footage, we haven't seen a lot of photographs of, that were to the right of Trump. It looks like it's most likely that they actually took the shot that neutralized the threat, which put them at about 170 yards to the shooter.
The gunman is shot.
We can see the guy there.
So where did the bullet come from?
He's on top of the roof. Don't go over there.
Audio analysis of this video by an acoustic expert at Montana State University found that the distance from the camera to the sniper who took the fatal shot was roughly 175 yards. This matches the distance from the camera to the southern sniper team, indicating one of these officers likely killed the suspected gunman. We also know from aerial imagery of the area that a tree blocked the northern sniper team's line of sight to the gunman, but the southern team had a clearer view.
Mm-hmm. That it would appear that way, and it also appears that that closer in team actually, that their view could have been obstructed either by a tree or, in any case, this shooter climbed up from the backside of the building sloped until he actually crests that top where he can be seen, where he actually, the second he does that, it seems like very quickly he's starting to take shots. And that's another thing I think that went good, was that law enforcement officer heard, hey, there's somebody that's might be up on that roof. He took it upon himself. He went over there. Another officer comes over, lifts him up, is what's reported, of course, by local police officers or the department is, hey, he lifted him up. As a matter of fact, he gets up there. He's holding onto the roof, and he turned around, and the shooter turned around and pointed his rifle at him. The officer, was going to reach for his weapon, but they fell. He fell off the other guy.
Or he just was like, oh God, there's a gun in my face, and I'm not prepared to grab a weapon. I need to seek cover.
Right.
Real quick, I want you to maintain that thought, but going back, because this is something that I really hadn't thought about, and definitely hasn't been talked about in the media. And that is, we have these 2 sniper teams, counter sniper teams, and there's always been this assumption that the one on the left, which had a shorter distance between them, because of where they were oriented, that means that they were automatically, that was their sector. But that actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's very likely, given the line of sight and some of the trees that were obscuring that building, is it possible that they had cross coverage? So, the ones on the left were actually covering the sector on the right, and the ones on the right were actually covering the sector on the left.
It is very possible. Of course, I don't know unless you actually see the plan, see the graphics and things like that the advance would have come up with. But it is very possible they could have overlapped. They even could have just said, hey, listen, this venue, it's, we've able to cut out such a large portion of it that I want both teams actually to observe everything. That's also very possible, and in some cases you would.
Now,
do
would
that.
they have comms with one another and talking to one another of trying to deconflict areas that they're covering, they're watching, so that we don't have all four counter sniper teams looking at the exact same area at any one given time?
So they do have comms. This is the way the comms would typically work when you're talking about Special Operations Division. They're on a separate channel than what the agents on the outer, in the middle perimeter, and the officers and everybody else there operating magnetometers, to get inside that middle perimeter area. They're going to be on a different channel in that middle perimeter.
The CST is going to have their own channel and basically their own internal comms outside of everybody else. So they're not having to listen to all the chatter that's going to go on constantly.
No, so that's true, but they're also, and I'm going to say this, with a grain of salt, because this is the way it was. I don't know exactly right now. In last Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania, I couldn't tell you exactly what the comms procedure was, but it's always been you have basically two radios. One radio you're going to be able to communicate with all your tactical elements on. Another radio that you're going to have, you're going to be able to communicate with the shift around the protectee themselves, and you're going to be able to also hear what's going on in that outer perimeter if you want to. But you're only going to be able to hear Secret Service. You don't have communications with local law enforcement.
Right.
You're talking about entirely different radios. There's an encryption process there and everything else.
Sure.
So you don't have direct communication with local law enforcement.
Well, while we're talking about the CST teams, let's go ahead and talk about some of the differences or some of the things that most people don't realize when it came to, how the TTPs of the counter sniper teams within Secret Service. One of the things I see time and time again, and I even brought up to you, is we see basically a shooter and a spotter. Normally, for those that don't know, most sniper teams, you have a spotter, a dedicated spotter, and you have a dedicated shooter. Talk a little bit how that is different and why it's different when it comes to the counter sniper teams within Secret Service.
So the Secret Service counter sniper teams, again, you're looking at countering somebody who is a sniper. As a matter of fact, their motto is contra insidiator, which is against one who lies in wait. So somebody who's out there who is lying in wait, who is trying to get into a position to be able to take a shot at our protectee, we have to be very good, very accurate, and reactionary with a low reaction time. Right, and we actually saw that there. It was only a few seconds before they engaged. I don't know at what point in time they could have observed him. That's impossible to really tell at this point. But I believe they engaged pretty quickly there. A few seconds being reactionary is pretty good. So they did their job in this particular case, but understand.
So with the CST though, you do not have a dedicated shooter and a dedicated spotter.
So you don't. That's exactly correct. You don't have a dedicated shooter or spotter, and it's simply because it cuts down on the reaction time. If I'm the spotter and you're the shooter, and I have to describe to you, and you're just not seeing the threat that I'm seeing, you're talking about potential, I'm in downtown Chicago having to look at all these buildings. You might not see what I see, and it would take several seconds added on to that reactionary time.
Just to talk you on target.
Right? So basically, if I observe the threat, I'm going to call out that threat, right? I'm going to identify the threat. I'm going to call that out over the radio. I'm going to make sure that my partner knows. I'm going to get down to my weapon system, and then I'm going to convey to my wind caller, because that other shooter now becomes my spotter, and I'm going to convey.
So those
to him.
roles are completely interchangeable with the way that you guys are task organized.
Absolutely. And that way you also maximize your personnel capabilities too, right? If my spotter is on vacation, I'm not taking out a team. Right. So you're interchangeable. You can send guys out. It doesn't matter who you pair me with. I know that everybody can do this job. I know they can
Everybody's a
engage
spotter.
these targets.
Everybody's a shooter. And the other thing that does is that is a force multiplier in that, because the other thing you have to consider, there could be multiple snipers out there, multiple threats. Mm-hmm. So now we have two shooters that are basically spotting for themselves if they have to. And then they can also eliminate targets individually at the same time. And that's something that is fairly different from most task organizations and roles and responsibilities of how law enforcement sniper teams and military sniper teams are set up. So, and I think that's something that's lost because of, like, I've seen even people on here, oh, I was a former military counter sniper and I did these operations and we should have had one guy on the glass and one guy on the freaking gun. Well, it's different. Like, I don't know what to say. It's different. Like, you're just speculating, and you're talking about what you would do given your capabilities, your training, how you were directed to operate is completely different from how they operate. And I think those delineations are really important because you can't come to, again, with bad information, you can't come to a good conclusion. The other thing that keeps being brought up is like, oh, they had him on glass. They should have taken this guy out that was crawling on a roof. So talk a little bit about rules of engagement that is specific to how you all operate.
So the rules of engagement for the counter sniper team are really simple, actually. If you see the threat, you eliminate or neutralize the threat. It is that simple. There's no, I know that a lot of law enforcement sniper elements have what they call a green light system, where they have to actually receive permission to be able to take a shot. And that's because they're working with ground elements to ensure that, all lesser means have failed, maybe working a hostage situation, and they're like, hey, we think we can resolve this. This is not that. This is reactionary.
So you do not need any sort of permission.
No, absolutely not. So let's debunk that right now. I know I've read a lot of posts, a lot of things out there that are saying, oh, they just didn't get permission to shoot. Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. That is, it doesn't even apply to this situation whatsoever.
With that being said, though, you have to positively ID a threat. Just a person crawling on a roof, you are not going to take a shot because there's a guy crawling on the roof.
Absolutely. I mean, he's a person of interest that I'm going to watch very closely. If I see somebody crawling across a roof, of course, right? But until I see a weapon or some capability that individual might have that could pose a threat to my protectee, I'm not taking that shot, right?
Yeah, and one of the things you talked about that we covered in our first attempt at this interview was all the challenges that, CST members face when it comes to, there's constantly people trying to get a higher vantage point. There's not a threat. They want to get a picture of the president, or they want to get a picture of, the venue or whatever else, or they're just trying to see it. And I love the story you shared with me, and this goes back to the counter sniper response teams. There's been actual times where people have gotten firearms and just like, just out of ignorance, like, I want to see closer. Oh, I have a magnification device over on this contraption. Let me just use this for an observation. Those are things that you guys face that most people don't realize that if there was ever just someone suspicious, if you were shooting everyone that was suspicious in those types of events, you have a lot of dead Americans on your hands.
You're absolutely right. There are people that really have done that have grabbed a rifle because it has an optic on it and they want to see what's going on, right, and they're too far out, right? This is a real problem. As a matter of fact, I faced that one time. I don't want to say where I was in a city, and I faced that, and unfortunately in this particular case, it was probably 3 or 4 seconds before I would have had to take a shot, and a counter sniper response team actually snatched up this person out of the window that they were hanging out of, looking through the scope of a rifle. And honestly, if my protectee was about to walk around a corner where he would have been exposed, I would not have had a choice. I would have absolutely eliminated and neutralized that threat.
So we have a person literally hanging out of a window with a rifle. That's been positively ID'd, but luckily that possible threat didn't have a line of sight on your protectee, so that's why you didn't shoot. So these are all considerations that, when you're sitting there criticizing from ignorance, like these are things that people just don't realize. And I think it's really important to put things in perspective on this.
Yeah, you're always going to have to stand ready to articulate, why did I take this shot? 100%. And you have to be able to identify, not only did I identify that this person was potentially a threat, but they were actually presenting in that moment an emergency where somebody's life or limb was in peril because, they presented this themselves as a threat.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, just putting in perspective of the challenges of some type of event like that. I've definitely been on reconnaissance missions as a sniper and things like that where, people don't realize, yeah, there's the obvious, that building out there, but even if those sectors are broken up into two or however they delineated the coverage, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of feet of both in depth, width, height that those teams are responsible for. And we can only look in one direction at once. So it's a challenge that if you've never done that type of work before, that you just don't understand. And to sit there and, again, armchair quarterback and say, oh, I would have been right there the whole time, every time. Like, no, you wouldn't have. As a matter of fact, if that's what you were doing, all you did was watch that rooftop the entire time, you were not doing your job correctly. And I think, that just needs to be highlighted.
I think you're absolutely 100% correct. Yeah. People are missing the fact that there was still about a 180-degree circle that going out at least 1,000 yards that these guys are still responsible for. Yeah. Everything, every building, every movement, everything, every tree line, they're responsible for all of that in this venue. It's not just that one building.
All right, so hopefully that gives people a little bit of an insight into the challenges that role as a counter sniper team faces. Hopefully provide some information they just didn't have before. As far as the other elements on the ground, explain some of the other teams that are going to be out there, and let's talk about what their roles and responsibilities are.
So the other elements, of course, that are out there, you're talking about the shift in particular, because that's actually the most highlighted in all the video footage and everything else. They got there quickly. They covered the president. The former president and now candidate, which is so important to say. They covered him. They assessed him. They determined, hey, he's ready to move. Let's move him. The mistake that I would have to say that definitely needs to be corrected in the future is, if you've made the decision to move him, he's ready to move, you've got to take control of that protectee. He doesn't get to dictate to you at that point what he's going to do. You're going to dictate to that protectee what you're going to do. And your protectee in that case, I mean, think about it. He just got shot in the head, right? He just took cover. A bunch of guys pigpiled him, and he's concerned about putting his shoes on. And then on his way off the stage, he gives that iconic, fist bump in the air. But that never should have happened. At that point in time, when they got him up and they were getting ready to move him, they should have moved him. They should not have allowed him to be able to dictate to them to stop in that moment. That never should have happened. And I think that there's probably some factors involved.
With that, and we talked about that in the last interview. You said, familiarity probably played a role in that. Explain to the viewers what you mean by that and how a former president's detail is typically assigned, or at least likely to be assigned to that protectee. So
when you have a protectee, a president or a former president, you see the same people every single day, right? And with a former president, the shift is so small that actually you see them and they always get to know their names, mannerisms, things like that. They talk to them, on a personal level, eventually at one point.
You build a relationship with them. Whether you're trying to maintain strictly a professional relationship or not, you can't be that close to the protectee, the family, interacting with them on such a daily basis that there is not some sort of personal connection made. I think that's unavoidable and probably very good in a lot of places. There are times, I'm sure, when that is a major contributing factor to people caring about a person on a personal level, to where they're going to take greater risks than they probably normally would have.
I agree, and it's not such a bad thing, like you said. In the right setting, it's really not such a bad thing. I think about actually a friend of mine who was on former President Reagan's detail when he was alive. And towards his twilight years, when he was becoming a little bit more mentally absent, he liked to go out to the swimming pool, and he liked to actually, skim leaves and things like that off of the off the swimming pool, and he actually smiled, and it brought him joy and happiness and things like that. So what they would do is when he would run out of those leaves, a lot of times they would kick some leaves in there and stuff, and he would look up and he would smile and he would walk around. And Nancy Reagan knew that they did those things, as a matter of fact, and she appreciated, she even expressed to them, I really appreciate you guys. You know, you keep him busy, you keep an eye on him, you protect him. When you're assigned a detail like that, you're not just protecting life and limb, you're also protecting the reputation of that person the best you can, you know, protecting from embarrassment, just even the simple daily things, and which is why I 100% condemn people who write books about things that they saw when they were in the Secret Service, or they write things that are embarrassing to a former president or something. I don't care if that president is living or has since passed. The bottom line is you protect the integrity of that person, that office, by doing that. That's what you do. So
no, and that makes sense. I mean, you're right. You know, your job as a Secret Service agent is not just to, you're not protecting their personal reputation, but really at a much larger level, what you're doing is you're protecting the reputation of the office of the President of the United States, but ultimately protecting the reputation of our country.
That's right.
You know, it's an act of patriotism to keep your mouth shut about personal deficiencies, character flaws and things like that. So that's interesting.
And I want to qualify that, because I don't think people to take things out of context. The Secret Service isn't into covering up crimes, okay? Yeah. That's not it, but there are things that people do on a regular basis that could be kind of embarrassing. I mean, you think about all the protectees and the fact that they've been married, they have children, things like that, the conversations that you're privy to or that you hear, the things that happen between a child and their parent. You have to protect that family from that type of embarrassment, that those things could get out. That's the dirty laundry. We don't need that getting out.
I don't know what the SOP is if the protectee does something criminal, but you're definitely not there to run to the press and say, hey, you know what, this guy, you may like him, but he's actually a scumbag for whatever reason.
More than just the fact that I've got to protect him physically, right? So all that being said, now let's go back to Butler, Pennsylvania, and let's look at, his detail. The detail that he had in Butler, Pennsylvania, was this in fact his former president's detail? And if it was, why was that not changed when he became candidate Trump? And now you've got a much higher threat that's on him. As a former president, if he wasn't, running for office again or something like that, the chances are that the threat analysis is going to reveal that the threat is actually pretty low, right? People are tracking what's current, what's relevant. Those are the things that we see in the media that everybody gets riled up and angry about. Sure. But when he became candidate Trump, why was his detail not changed out? Right? Why did he not get the kind of compliment that you have seen with every other candidate? And that's really the question that we have to ask here, because that actually could have contributed, I believe, this is speculation, of course, but that probably contributed to, hey, hold on, wait here a minute. And they listened to him and stopped on the stage with him standing up, head and parts of his shoulders even exposed. At this point, if there was a second shooter, that would have actually could have been a fatal moment for him. You don't take those chances. And I think the familiarity with him, right? If this is his former detail, if they're members of his former detail, that familiarity actually would have been a detriment in this particular case. And they should have been changed out the second he became a candidate. Now, that's my opinion.
Right.
So, but that I can't say that that's the SOP.
Yeah, and conversely, there could have been somebody on his former detail that, had a close personal relationship with him. Because I mean, let's face it, those Secret Service agents that are on his protected detail are seeing the candidate Trump or the protectee that they're assigned to more often than their own family.
Absolutely.
And it is realistic, or it is conceivable to think that there could have been like the lead agent, like, no, I want to stay on my protectee because I care about him and I can protect him better than anybody else. So I could see that conflict take place. But it does, after you told me that and looking at that footage, like that does it does ring of that. The conversations taking place in that is like, hold up, get my shoe, hold up, and we see Trump doing the iconic fist pump. That could have played a role, and it should probably be addressed. And
I think you even see one of the agents actually reach down and grab his hat.
yeah,
That's something you do for somebody that you're thinking about, that you actually care about. That's not something you do for somebody when you're just concerned with getting them off the X and I want to save this person's life.
no, that's some interesting insight there. So grabbing their hat's not SOP.
I'm pretty confident, Gary.
Securing their personal,
that's not going to be in
their
writing.
personal
somewhere.
items are not in policy.
I'm pretty confident in that.
Let's talk about. I'm sure we have some more things that we can cover with that, but let's take a minute and talk about the roles and responsibilities of the counter assault team. I don't think most people are familiar with them. Some people have never even seen that before. When we have what appears to be only 2 counter assault team members on the ground there assigned to him, while Trump is up there speaking and they're off camera, besides making sure that the motorcade is ready, all those things, what are they actively doing at that moment? Are they actually watching the crowd? What type of security? I'm sure they're not just sitting over there like, hey, we're not moving right now, so we're smoking and joking, taking a break. What is it that they would normally be actively doing while Trump is up on the stage giving his speech?
So typically when you have a tactical element like that, heavy with the guns, of course, as you saw, most of the time working with staff members and things like that, they don't want those kinds of things in the press shot, right? So they want them to usually be tucked away close by, and that's typically what you're going to see. They're going to be tucked away in a close proximity so that they can respond in the time that they need to respond and help that inner shift to be able to perform that protective shroud around that around the protectee himself. So, and that's exactly what you really saw there. You didn't see them in the shot, in the camera, or anything else. But the second something occurred, bam, these guys are appearing, and they're actually helping to protect that shift as they are on top of the president or on top of the candidate in this particular case, to ensure that they're safety and ready to move. And then they're going to actually provide protection for that movement of the protectee at that time.
All right, so we covered what the CAT team does. We talked about the personal security detail. We talked about the counter sniper teams, their roles and responsibilities, the challenges that all of those face, what they should be doing during this event. Anything else that they did well, any of those elements did well or could have done better that we haven't covered so far?
Well, I mean, other than the catastrophic failure, of course, of not mitigating the threat prior to actually the event altogether, I think really that was the real issue.
So what specifically do you think was the major failure point that led to Trump being shot, someone being killed in the stands as well as other people being injured? What was the one thing that should have happened that didn't?
The one thing I think that could have been a game changer in this whole thing, and I see a lot of critiques out there. There should have been somebody on that rooftop or something like that. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. If I'm working as a counter sniper and I'm in a position where I can see everything that sees my protectee, and I've got a whole bunch of people on a whole bunch of different rooftops, I don't want that. That's more stuff I got to look at, right? Every time I see something moving and everything else, it's getting my attention, especially if I see somebody on a rooftop with a gun. Now I've got to verify, is that actually us? Is that somebody else? What's going on here, right? I don't want anybody on any rooftop if I could do it. I want to prevent access to that rooftop. I want to make sure it's clear the entire time the visit is taking place. So what really happened here, and what I think would have prevented this entire thing from even becoming an issue from the get-go, we would have had this individual into custody, and Corey would have his whole family, would have him actually at home at dinner tonight. And I think what really failed here is it was not mitigated the way it should have been. I believe an agent and 2 local police officers posted in that parking lot or right there being told very specifically, hey, I need you to make sure that this building is secure and nobody gets on this rooftop. It's danger close, and then it has a line of sight. And I can't see the backside of this building. I need you to be my eyes and ears right here to watch that, right?
So, having an agent, a couple of local law enforcement assigned to those duties. And the other thing that you talked about earlier was a counter surveillance team out there scanning the area, looking for threats. Obviously, I'm sure technical security could intercept standard radio comms, so they could be scanning the airwaves. I don't know if that's something they normally do. I know in the military we did. So I'm assuming that the Secret Service has those capabilities. And folks, we've been very careful. We talked about a lot of different things, making sure that we don't reveal anything or get into specifics that could have operational security implications, right? We've been very careful. We vetted these questions. We vetted this. So just understand that we have been cognizant of that. So, going back to the rooftop, there's been lots of things. Number one, the director of Secret Service said it was too sloped. Was it too sloped to put somebody up there?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's actually looked like it to me like it was less sloped than the ones that the
It was
sniper team was on.
barely more than flat. Did not have a huge slope. I thought that was, I don't even know why someone would say that and think that that was a legitimate response. So there's that. The other question that keeps coming up is why didn't we have Secret Service personnel posted on that rooftop for all the things that you highlighted? You said it was an immediate threat. It had a line of sight of President Trump. Why didn't they have somebody posted up on that roof?
And I like you bringing that up actually about Director Cheadle's response to that, because the fact of the matter is her response in saying it because it was a safety issue because the roof was sloped, that was actually in response to the question, why was nobody up on that rooftop? There should never be anybody up on that rooftop, right? And all you're going to do is you're going to prevent people from getting on a rooftop. The focus of everybody's attention is this one rooftop. Yeah. But if your concern is, I don't want anybody on any rooftop, how many people do I need to put on every single rooftop in the entire area?
Sure.
That's ludicrous. Yeah. What I want is clean rooftops. Yeah. Rooftops that I can scan, I don't see anything, we're good, right? So that's what I want to see, because it cuts down, as a counter sniper, what I have to be concerned about. If there's somebody on every single rooftop around that entire venue.
Could be a bad guy and you assume that it's a good guy and it's a threat and you don't realize it because you're used to seeing somebody on a rooftop.
That's right.
Yeah.
Here's the other part the problem that poses, especially in this circumstance. We know that there was not adequate Secret Service personnel to really cover this event the way it should have been covered, right? So now here's the thing. Who are you going to cover? Who are you going to have standing on these rooftops? And all of a sudden, it's probably going to be local law enforcement. How am I going to talk to them? I don't recognize them. I don't know them. I don't know what their capabilities are. I don't know what their rules of engagement are. I don't know what they're going to do in an emergency. And they probably don't know what to do in case of a lot of these emergencies, because executive protection is not their responsibility, right? It's a task that we're performing them. That they're performing in support of executive protection. So the bottom line is, I don't want anybody on the rooftop. I want you to prevent people from getting to that rooftop. That's what I want, especially when it's danger close as it was.
Yeah, and to automatically assume that there's SWAT teams out there or law enforcement snipers that have the same capabilities as, the Secret Service counter sniper teams or whatever else, or the CAT teams, hopefully people understand the fact that there's a big difference between capabilities from department to department to, you could have different entities in the same county that, we have one SWAT team or one SRT team that is highly capable and another one that happens to be available that has zero training, zero capability, or very low. And unfortunately, you end up with a lot of law enforcement that are not very proficient in a lot of areas that end up on those types of teams. So it is guesswork when it comes down to how capable any particular law enforcement agency entity actually is.
That's true.
And it's not a risk that the Secret Service normally wants to take when it comes to actually providing a ballistic solution to problems within the area that you're supposed to cover.
So, and that being said, let me say this too. we talk about primary, alternate, contingency, emergency, or whatever. If I'm down to, hey, we have no Secret Service, what are you going to do to mitigate this threat? Well, then I am going to very specifically, I'm going to go to whatever police officers I'm going to talk to about posting right there to mitigate that particular area that I can't see. And I'm going to make sure that they know exactly what they're watching and why they're there. Now, besides that, I want to make sure I have direct communication with them, right? This is danger close we have right here, and it's a real threat area. So I'm probably going to ask them, hey, I want you guys to park a marked car right there, turn the lights on and leave it, because on the other side of the building, it can't even be seen from the venue, so it's not a distraction. So in this solution where we have this marked car out here with the lights on, it is absolutely a great deterrent, right? But you also have the officers that are going to go with that. And I would actually have a minimum of 2 working in conjunction together for the same thing. Even if all I say is, I want the 2 of you to stand here and watch this ladder, right? I know if I'm a police officer, that might irritate me to death. So I'm probably going to tell them exactly why I need them there and what that responsibility entails. But more importantly, I want direct communication with them. I'm not going to have that, and I didn't see this in Butler, is I'm going to want to have a local officer, probably, like a SWAT team member or something like that, who has direct communications with his radio with me on the roof. And I think if that had happened, if that was the truth, that would have been the linchpin right there. That would have prevented all this from happening, because all that local law enforcement personnel, they had information about a potential threat long before anybody else. But how do you communicate that across to the Secret Service? How does that communication what does that look like? How can that take place? And the best way that takes place is, in the most efficient way that takes place, I, on that team right there, having a local law enforcement with his communications with that outer perimeter area that I'm really concerned about right next to me. And that way, if I need one of them to, hey, I see there's somebody left a backpack sitting out over here, outside the venue area, which, by the way, I'm giving you real things that have happened, right? Sure. I can say, hey, do you have an officer in that area? Can you contact him? Can you ask him to go out and check out that backpack to make sure that that's not actually abandoned, or something, or it might have an explosive device in it? Yeah, absolutely. And they can go out and they can actually check out what I see as a potential threat, right? Same thing. Now I've got a protectee that's about to take the stage. I can say, hey, are we good? Is it clear on the other side of that building? Can you have direct comms with those guys? Can you just check in with them and make sure everything's good? He's going to do that. Good to go. Now, if he can't do that, if he can't get a hold of those officers, that's a clue in the business, right? I'm going to maybe hold up my protectee. And I can tell you, there is at least 3 times that I can count that I have personally held up the movement of a president because I couldn't ensure their safety or security in these circumstances, where I said, hey, hold them up because, and I actually wouldn't give a because right then and there. They would ask me later, they would just say, sir, just need a couple seconds if you could just hold up, and they would hold him on the plane or in the vehicle before he gets out, because I want to make sure that potential threat is mitigated before he sets foot and is exposed.
So for instance, if we had Trump on the stage, he's giving a speech and suddenly a threat is identified, it's not uncommon, or would be normal for, hey, you know what, we have a threat, we need to get him off the stage for a minute. So that is one of the tools that they could have utilized there had they, and even going back to this, there's lots of different types of security. There's lots of different security organizations within government, military, corporate, all these other things. But ultimately, what they all have in common is we're trying to mitigate, deter, detect, and respond to threats. We have to have that continuum in place. And it looks like there were failures on all of those. The mitigation portion of it, the ability to deter a threat, that wasn't in place, the ability to detect a threat, and the ability to quickly and effectively respond. And it's just unbelievable that happened with the Secret Service. And while, having a security detail for such a high-profile candidate like President Trump.
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you, and we've talked about it, that local officer who went up on that, tried to get up on that roof and see what was going on, he forced the timeline of that shooter, which I believe played a massive part in actually saving Trump's life, because he felt rushed. His shots were, they weren't as accurate probably as what he's even capable of. He got to a point where he was exposed and could be detected by the counter sniper teams. But when he got to that point, and took those shots so rapidly. So it happened actually pretty quick from that sort of perspective. But that officer force that movement, So I gotta give a shout out. I gotta give kudos to that officer. He looked into things. I imagine they probably even talked about these things on their radios as well. There's reports that was the case, is that these things were called out as well. So I think local law enforcement, for not being executive protection, I think I don't have any issues with it.
Speaking of which, we had Director Cheadle come out and kind of give the buck stops here speech, but she put a lot of responsibility and ultimately a lot of blame on local law enforcement. She basically said that though the local law enforcement was assigned security to actually secure that area around that building. And apparently there are confirmed reports that there was local law enforcement inside that building. Since then, and one of the big things that you and I talked about yesterday was that the mayor and I believe the police commissioner came out and said, first of all, no, we were not given any roles or responsibilities. Nothing other than traffic control and, basically moving cars and playing parking attendants. So if that is true, if there was no security roles assigned to local law enforcement, whose responsibility is that, and why was that not done?
100%. The responsibility is the Secret Service. There's no getting around it. You can't avoid it. You can't push that off and say, "Oh, I gave it to them." That's not their job. It's your job, and there is absolutely zero excuse for not making sure that was secure. But I also read a lot of conflicting information on that, actually. So looking at the police officers, actually, they were inside the building. And then you look at the statements that actually Director Cheadle said, where she said that, of course, the comment about somebody, why weren't they on the roof? But then she also went on to say that we decided to secure the building from inside. Okay, guess what? It was secure. There were police officers inside the building, So, I don't know exactly, these are, you're talking about a director, you're talking about, the chief of police or something like that, the commissioners or
mayor.
The mayor.
I think it was the mayor and the police commissioner that came out and said, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we were not given a security role outside of traffic control.
Right. So you have these actually, at this level, you've got these two who are a little bit of conflicting information here, right? But when we really look at who's responsible, is it the local police or the state police or anything like that? Is it any other law enforcement agency's responsibility? And the fact is it's not. And we talked about it earlier. As a matter of fact, earlier in this interview, I had mentioned you can give them a task.
Yeah.
That task
Can't
may help
delegate
you to mitigate.
responsibility.
But you can't. You're right. You cannot delegate the responsibility.
So even if, number one, one of the things that I know I'm inclined to do is say, you know what, this wasn't the people on the ground's fault. This is leadership problem. And I think there's definitely some truth to that. And I would love to hear whether or not resources were withheld to now candidate Trump. And I want to know if there was resources denied because of who he is or for political reasons. So there's that piece of it. The other piece of this is, we have a lead on the ground that is responsible for assigning these different roles. So not only is it the people on the ground, boots on the grounds that I have an inclination to protect, but I think I want to be fair and I think ultimately it doesn't make sense to me that, or I guess what I would say is, I don't think it's conceivable that the lead on the ground told hire, hey, I'm going to enroll or use local law enforcement to secure this area, and then they were told not to. Would that even possibly be the case? Would they need to get approval to use local law enforcement as security resources?
No.
Okay, so that is definitely boots on the ground problem and failure right there. And on top of that, not only is it their role to, not only is it their responsibility to get these resources and utilize local law enforcement as a security asset, but on top of that, they have to have things in place to ensure that that is successful, right? Just like you said, it's one thing to say, okay, you guys are in charge of security over here, but it doesn't end there. We need to have a Secret Service agent in place ensuring that that actually is being done and being effectively done.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the Secret Service does this day in and day out. They can show up literally anywhere in the world, set up these perimeters. They can process people to, and put people into different, areas within the security layers and everything else. And we do this day in and day out in so many different environments, right? So you look at a venue, you're like, I already know exactly what I'm going to do here, for the most part. I mean, little things is you're doing the advance, come out and you have to make adjustments and things like that. But you already know where the hot spots are. So yeah, when you're going to use local officers like that, I know that when I put in my request, I need this many agents. I've already put those things built that into that plan. Yeah. I need them out there with these guys because we do this day in and day out. They don't do this day in and day out. So let's get somebody out there who knows how we operate.
So, saying, hey, you know what, local law enforcement dropped the ball, we didn't. That's not a viable answer.
Not even close.